Well, it's good to see you, and maybe this is the unscripted part. So what I thought I'd do is sort of a lightning round of issues in about 10 minutes and leave a little bit of time for questions. And it was great to see the last panel because I got a flavor for some of the things that you're hearing about and some of the interests. And was just mentioned, I just returned last week from Egypt and was at the climate conference. And the interesting thing is this year, California had a story to tell. And a year ago, the strongest climate bill died on the floor of the Senate on the last day of the session. Only got 14 votes and it needed 21. And while we did great things on resilience and putting things on the budget, we were stalling out on climate policy. So the Senate president appointed a 12-senator climate working group and named me the chair, which at the time I thought was a little bit of a booby prize. But it turned out that we had 25 meetings. We had 9 stakeholder meetings with the building trades unions, regular non-building trades unions, environmental groups, environmental justice, business, energy, local government. And we crafted a bill package and we worked really hard. And central to those issues were workforce and equity, because I think the thing that had divided the Senate on previous things is the fact that people thought those were not addressed. And so we had bills on electric vehicles and how to deal with electricity deserts, how to deal with multifamily units and the fact that people couldn't charge electric vehicles there, to have a dashboard so anybody could look and see exactly where we were on our goals at a given point. We didn't have to rely on the press to do it. Look for high road labor agreements, deal with oil well capping, which does one of the significant pieces of methane releases, and try to jumpstart all these issues. And we ended up landing 11 bills on the governor's desk that he almost entirely signed. I had the biggest one, and then the governor parachuted in with 3 weeks to go in the legislative session and had 4 big bills on climate goals that he wanted to really move ahead on, and then he adopted a 5th bill, which is my big bill from the climate working group. And in the Senate, we got every single one of these bills off the Senate floor, plus more. Most of them got out in the Assembly, and the governor signed them. At the same time, we put $54 billion in the budget to go out over a number of years to deal with electric vehicles, whole hosts of issues that would jumpstart sort of incentives and things in the climate program. So this is the story that we had to tell when we were meeting with other countries, other delegations, other groups in Egypt. And then if you sort of take it down to the level of just what's going on in this district, and interestingly, there are people in the room that might be involved in almost anything I'm going to mention. I mean, you just heard from Joby Aviation and May again. What they're doing is amazing, and the workers own the company or have a stake in the company, and they're really dealing with trying to jumpstart electricity. And when they turn around, or electric aerial vehicles, when you turn around, then it means what's our higher education system doing? What are we doing to make sure those jobs stay in California? And it creates public policy issues. I visited the foam group in Santa Cruz that is taking styrofoam, which is not recyclable, and repurposing it into a biodegradable foam and deal with packaging and other issues in a way that they're having trouble scaling up fast enough for what people want. And in the north part of the district in San Jose, I visited a company that is manufacturing roof shingles that are actually solar panels. So whenever you get your house re-roofed, you're actually converting to solar in a way that might just become the natural order of things. And so what's happening is that there are businesses that are sort of meeting the needs toward our climate goals. in a way that it's hard, because many times people say, oh, just tell us what you need. But the fact that people can assess what we need, can work with us, can go out and do it, is as significant as anything. And at the state level, I was Secretary for Natural Resources, and I know there's, drones as part of the discussion today, and just how different technology is used to be able to spot fires, to be able to measure water levels with regard to overdrafting and other things, particularly in the Central Valley, are things that are just moving us light years ahead technologically over what we had done historically in natural resources. And as hard as it is to believe, everything is starting to be based on science. That was the transition I was trying to lead as secretary. We have more scientists in the Fish and Wildlife Department than we have game wardens. When we were doing oil and gas, I had a science advisor who would advise me on issues to deal with that. And when we were doing the Delta and issues related to that, it had to be based in science to try to unlock the historic divisions. And right here is the largest network of marine protected areas off of any of the 50 states. It is science-based and adaptively managed based on the science. So then you turn around and you say from state government, what do you need besides the goals to do this? And it is really incentives, different things that might leverage things, different things that might keep businesses here, the manufacturing here, which is still a big challenge if you do it. And then how does our education system move to keep up with what the demands are in the changing economy because of these additional developments? And so that is the challenge. I chair the Education Budget Subcommittee in the Senate to try to make sure our educational institutions keep up. And one of our challenges as legislators is just to make sure the law and the programs keep up with where we are. I mean, I did a bill that you might laugh at this year because sometime in 2008 or so, the technology for more efficient vehicles was ethanol, or trying to develop a fuel that wasn't fossil fuel and mix it in. So there was a bill passed that said you can't buy a state car for the fleet without doing an ethanol analysis. Well, that law was signed into law, has never changed. So lo and behold, the state's buying all these electric vehicles, and the department has to do an ethanol analysis before deciding to buy an electric vehicle. Well, frankly, that's stupid. So I did a bill that sort of removes that requirement when you're dealing with vehicles that are electric and moving ahead. And so our job many times is to have the programs and the departments and the laws keep pace with the changing technology against the goals that we're trying to do on climate. And so that is just the briefest of overviews of sort of where we are in climate, how things are going and how we're trying to incent, and then the challenges that it brings to us, whether it's education or other things, and trying to make sure we match that changing dynamic. So with that, in whatever time is remaining, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Yes, sir. The question was, is of I think I said 54, but it doesn't matter. The billions of dollars in the budget, how much is for technology? And so much is covered under the overall heading that yes, there's some, but that is where our fire resilience is, our water resilience, electric vehicles, any subsidy for solar, other things are all lumped in that and expanded. And so there is some. And the real intent has been, and some of it we appropriated, and then the Energy Commission or other will actually give the will flesh it out. And for example, one thing that ironically is not in that 54 billion is that when we did the Diablo Canyon extension, and I was working really hard to shape that deal because that happens to be in my district, and I wanted to make sure there was environmental stuff that went along with it. It's a whole nother subject, but we need more electricity with Diablo Canyon or without Diablo Canyon. Because the reason to extend it is there isn't enough electricity on the grid at peak summer days to be able to guarantee that there won't be a crash. So as part of that, we managed to get $1.1 billion for renewable electricity into the Diablo bill, and then the Energy Commission will prioritize based on matching funds, based on how much electricity it produces, based on whether doing some incentives will develop an entire new direction. And so there are different pieces of the money in the budget that was crafted that way. And we're still working to get it all out and understandable so people might know where they would fit in. But the short answer is yes, there's things in there. It's just a question of how some of that is crafted. What else? I'm hearing oh, there's one way in the back. The question was, how is offshore wind energy progressing? And a year ago, we adopted AB 525, which tried to prioritize it, give some direction to doing it. And just next week, the federal government will act on the first two calls, which is off of Humboldt and off of San Luis Obispo County, to, in essence, start to designate who might develop it. And the general feeling is that if that continues to move apace, in the ideal world, the first energy would be coming in would be coming in 2029, 4 years after the Diablo extension, and more likely 2030. And so, interestingly, one of the things when I was negotiating the Diablo deal is the governor originally wanted a 10-year extension, which would take it to 2035. But for the call that is off of the San Luis Obispo coast, the transmission would be the transmission from Diablo primarily. So we shortened the extension to 5 years so that the offshore wind would be ready to come in and use the transmission out of Diablo at roughly the same time that the nuclear power plant would decommission. And the Energy Commission, in implementing the bill, is starting to set goals for the amount that needs to be done. And all the issues that are going with it, there are attempts to resolve them or address them. For example, it really requires a massive port facility. And the State Lands Commission is doing a study about where that might be for San Luis Obispo. And there are ports in San Luis Obispo, but you'd have to build out into the ocean, and that's not winning any environmental awards with groups in how you do that. And you would require at least 2 acres or 3 acres of laydown space so that you would have space for the stems and the actual turbines. And you have to have a cable that will do energy to certain places that meshes with that. And there was talk of even going as far as the Port of Los Angeles or the Port of Long Beach. But if you do that, they have to have laydown space, and it would displace existing cargo storage and other things. It's more likely it would be Port Hueneme or a place north. And then there are issues about the impact on marine mammals and aviary species. And there's been a contract with scientists here in the Monterey Bay Area to examine that. And it's my hope that they're examining that in a way to make it work and to mitigate those. And so all those things are coming together. the goals for doing it, having the transmission, trying to figure out where the port is, trying to figure out how you do the mitigations, and the federal government has expedited it with these early calls. And then secondly, and I know I'm getting the hook, secondly, the other place to do it off of the California coast is off of Humboldt County. And that is, there's just no transmission that comes into the grid that's adequate now to take the electricity off the Humboldt coast and bring it in. And so the challenge with that one is making sure that in the 5 or 6 or 7 years before it comes on, that we develop extra transmission that links to the grid that allows us to take that on. So it is prioritized, all the issues are being worked on, and the real goal is by the end of this decade to have that work and to have it proven in a way that that turns out to be the first of a whole series of offshore wind that brings it on. And the wind goals offshore now in the first calls would be 2 times the energy or more of the base load from Diablo Canyon, so that you could bring that in a way that it could relieve us of the need for Diablo Canyon. And so as you could tell from that explanation, it's a lot of things having to come together, but we are really committed to doing it and committed to try to do all those things to make it happen in an expeditious way. So thank you. Pleasure to be here. Look forward to continuing all these conversations.